I used to measure courage in small, ordinary ways, the walk from my bed to the kettle on mornings when grief felt heavier than sleep, the steady breath I learned to take each time the baby pressed a heel against the top of my belly, as if testing the borders of the life I was building for us, the way I could hold my head level in a world that wanted to tilt it down. I'm Ava, 32, a preschool teacher who keeps spare stickers in every pocket, a daughter raised by a woman who could turn a double shift into a love letter, and lately the quiet center of a storm I didn't choose. 5 months pregnant, I went shopping alone for baby clothes on a day I promised myself would be gentle pastel aisles and lullabies on loop shelves of soft cotton and tiny socks the size of forgiveness. I was comparing two shades of baby blue when peace snapped like old thread. I turned and there he was, Ethan, and not alone. She stood tucked under his arm like a promise he'd made somewhere far from me, a woman polished into a photograph, sleek hair, careful laughter, a dress that caught the store's soft light and hardened it. They looked like the future reenacting itself 5 feet from the life I still carried. My hand found the cart, my throat found silence, and the baby found me with a flutter that felt like both fear and reminder. I would not disappear. I rested my palm on my stomach like a vow and watched them notice me, watched his face change, watched the past pretend it didn't owe me anything. Grief has a choreography, humiliation has a temperature. I felt both at once. He asked what I was doing there as if I had wandered into the wrong story, and in that cold, ridiculous moment, I understood how easily a person can rewrite you if you let them. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I said I was shopping for my son, and the word son steadied me like a handrail on a moving train. Her eyes measured me the way women sometimes are taught to measure other women: inventory first, empathy last. I told myself the aisle belonged to me, too. The world did not end. It only rearranged. I left with a small gray onesie that felt in my hands, like proof of a future no one else was allowed to narrate. Afterward, I sat in the car until the music the store pumped through its speakers stopped echoing inside my ribs. I thought of the day he left 2 weeks after I showed him the pink line, after I tucked the sonogram under a magnet on our fridge like a small moon I needed to see every time I reached for milk. He said he needed space like love were a crowded room, and I the wrong kind of furniture. I packed what I could carry in one evening and drove to a one-bedroom 5 blocks from my mother, where the windows overlook a maple that sheds itself every October with more grace than I felt capable of. At night, I would hold the grainy print of our child to the light and listen to a heartbeat that didn't need permission to go on. Being left while pregnant is a peculiar kind of loneliness. Your body is crowded with life, while your days feel emptied, and every kindness you offer yourself costs double because there is someone else listening. I went back to work because small hands tugging at your sleeve and voices asking if the clouds can be glued back together are their own kind of medicine. The kids didn't know how to pity me. They only knew how to include me. At circle time, I could feel the baby roll a private tide beneath the songs. At lunch, I would excuse myself to the bathroom to breathe through a wave of nausea and remind myself that love is not a math problem. You failed, it's a language where someone stopped trying to learn your words. Weeks later, an invitation arrived in an envelope that smelled faintly of money, pretending to be generosity. The Hart Foundation's Winter Gala, his family's annual philanthropy parade addressed not to Mrs. Hart, but to me alone, as if someone upstairs at the printer realized you cannot erase a person by refusing to use her hyphen. I pressed the card flat and told myself no, then told myself yes. Not to chase him, not to prove anything, but because I had been a woman who belonged in ballroom light once, and I wanted to see if she could find her way there without a hand at the small of her back. I borrowed a navy dress from a friend and smoothed it over my bump until it looked like intention instead of apology. In the mirror, I saw my mother's jaw and the way her mouth makes a promise when it's closed. At the hotel, the chandeliers held their breath and the floor gathered women into constellations of glass and sound. I took the room slowly, letting it recognize me. The guest board near the door glowed with names I used to know. Ethan stood beside hers, Savannah like a caption under a picture that expected applause. I felt the baby turn and whispered the same 3 words I had whispered every morning for months. We are enough. They saw me before I could decide whether to pretend I hadn't seen them. He stiffened the way men do when the story arrives out of order. She smirked like a knife, pretending to be a compliment. Assigned seating later placed us across from one another, and the evening began to play at being civil. But a story knows when it's being lied to. When the fundraising host announced a donation in honor of new beginnings and their faces lifted, the word new rang in my chest like an insult delivered on linen. I breathed. I stayed. I let the room do its math. Because there is a difference between fighting and refusing to vanish. I was not there for spectacle, though spectacle tried to make me its stage. I was there to stand inside my name and not move. After dinner, I stood on the balcony and cupped the hard edge of winter air like water to my face. The city glittered as if wealth were weather. Behind me, the party swelled. I thought of the baby aisle and of my classroom's paper sons. I thought of the women in my family who learned to start over with less than this. A truth settled heavy and kind. I may never get the apology I deserved, but I could build a life that did not require it. I could be a mother who teaches her child that love is not proven by how long you wait outside a locked door. When I went back in, his mother touched my arm and led me to a corridor quiet enough to hear the carpet. Her apology was soft and flawed, and real enough to let me breathe differently for a moment. When I returned to the ballroom, their spotlight had moved on without them. I took that as instruction. On my way out, I passed a mirror and saw a woman I had not met before, tired, yes, but taller. Alone, yes, but not abandoned. Pregnant and still, despite everything, radiant with the stubbornness of hope. The night did not win. It only reminded me that I could. The night of the gala left me with a peculiar strength, the kind that doesn't roar, but hums quietly in your bones. I drove home through streets glazed with frost, my baby pressing insistently against my ribs, as though reminding me we were in this together. In the stillness of my apartment, I hung the navy dress back on its borrowed hanger and stood barefoot on the cold tiles staring at the stack of unopened mail on my counter. Among them was another envelope, this one with Ethan's neat, practiced handwriting. I almost threw it out, but curiosity is a sly thing. Inside was a letter, formal, almost clinical, offering a financial settlement. For the child's well-being, it read as though money could stitch over abandonment. My hands trembled, not because of the offer, but because it confirmed what I already knew: he wasn't coming back. Not for me, not for us. The letter was not love, not even regret. It was liability disguised as care. I placed it beside the sonogram still magneted to my fridge. 2 pieces of paper, 2 kinds of truth, one a heartbeat, the other a hollow. I chose which one mattered. Weeks stretched into a rhythm of doctor's appointments, teaching finger painting to 4-year-olds, and quiet evenings tracing the outline of the crib I'd assembled in my small bedroom. My mother came often, her hands always carrying soup or folded baby blankets. One night while knitting on my sofa, she said, "You're stronger than you think." I wanted to believe her. Some days I did. Other days I looked at my swollen feet and wondered if strength was just another word people used when they didn't know what else to say. Then came the twist I didn't expect. I was leaving school late one evening when I saw Savannah, his new girlfriend, waiting by my car. Her coat was flawless, her hair untouched by wind, but her eyes were wild. "You don't know him," she said before I could speak. "He's not who you think. He's not even who I thought." She handed me a folder, her manicured fingers trembling. Inside were documents, bank transfers, property deeds, investments under names I didn't recognize. It was evidence thick, undeniable, of fraud. Ethan wasn't just a man who walked out on his pregnant wife. He was a man building an empire on lies, and Savannah, whether by guilt or revenge, had just handed me the blueprint. I drove home in silence, the folder on the passenger seat like a ticking clock. Rage surged through me, hot and electric. But beneath it was something steadier, clarity. Betrayal wasn't only personal, it was criminal. And I held the proof. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the apartment, my daughter rolling inside me as though restless with me. At 3 a.m., I spread the documents across the kitchen table, my hands shaking less now. I thought of the gala, the smug smile, the letter that reduced my child to a financial burden. And then I thought of what it would mean to finally strip away his mask, not with tears but with truth. I wasn't just a woman scorned. I was a mother preparing to protect her child. I was a teacher who knew how to gather evidence and present it so even the smallest hands could understand. And I was done being quiet. In the morning, I called Daniel, an old friend from college who had gone into law. His voice sharpened as I explained. Bring everything, he said. If this is real, he won't just lose you, he'll lose everything. I hung up, exhaling for what felt like the first time in months. My life had been dismantled by betrayal, but maybe, just maybe, it was about to be rebuilt by justice. The day I carried that folder into Daniel's office, the city sky was gray and swollen, threatening snow. My coat barely buttoned over my belly, and every step up the courthouse stairs felt like I was dragging both past and future behind me. But I kept going because stopping meant surrender, and I had already done enough of that in my life with Ethan. Daniel spread the documents across his desk with the precision of a surgeon. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the numbers, flipping pages, cross-checking signatures. This isn't just carelessness, he said finally, voice low. This is deliberate. Shell companies' false transfers laundering. If this goes to court, he won't just lose custody, he could face prison. The word prison didn't feel real at first. Ethan had been the man who kissed my forehead after late shifts, who painted the nursery walls a pale yellow before walking out of our life. The idea that he had also been orchestrating something so dark made my stomach twist. Betrayal wasn't just in my bed, it was in every corner of our finances, every promise he had ever made. I sat there in silence until Daniel placed his hand gently on mine. You don't have to decide today, he said. But Ava, this isn't just about revenge. This is about protecting your child. If he's willing to build his world on lies, how can you trust him with hers? That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of my daughter's heartbeat on the fetal monitor I had rented. It sounded strong, steady, a rhythm older than my pain. I whispered to her, I'll keep you safe. The decision was no longer about me. It was about her. So I moved forward. Quietly at first. Daniel filed motions. Investigators dug deeper. Every new page of evidence was another nail in the coffin of the man I thought I had loved. But with each step, I also felt the weight of the past loosening. I wasn't chasing him anymore. I was confronting him. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Ethan showed up at my apartment one evening unannounced, his face pale, eyes frantic. He looked thinner, as if the lies had finally started to eat at him. We need to talk, he said, his voice breaking. I stood in the doorway, one hand on my belly, the other gripping the frame. There's nothing left to say. But he pushed. Savannah turned on me. She gave you things, didn't she? You don't understand, Ava. This isn't what you think. I cut him off. It's exactly what I think. And now the court will see it too. His face collapsed, then the mask shattering. He sank onto the steps outside my door, head in his hands. For the first time, I saw fear instead of arrogance. And in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need him to admit his sins. I already knew the truth. I closed the door. For the first time in years, it felt final. Over the next weeks, the case built momentum. Subpoenas, depositions. His name began to circulate in whispers of scandal. I focused on the baby's room, hanging tiny curtains, folding onesies into neat stacks. I played lullabies at night, letting their softness fill the space where his voice used to be. Each kick inside me was a reminder that life continues even when love fails. The trial date was set for after my due date, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had chosen the path of light, of truth, of protecting the little girl who would soon look up at me with eyes that deserved honesty. And as the first snow finally fell, blanketing the city in silence, I stood by the window with my hand on my belly and whispered the vow that had become my heartbeat: we are enough, and we are free. When the contractions began, I was alone in my apartment folding the last set of baby blankets my mother had dropped off. At first, I thought it was just another false alarm my body had been teasing me with aches for weeks. But when the pain gripped me a second time, sharper, deeper, I knew. I grabbed the hospital bag already packed by the door and called my mother, my voice breaking with both fear and relief. Within minutes, she was rushing me to the hospital, the city lights blurring past as my world narrowed into breath pain and the steady drum of my child insisting she was ready. Labor was long exhausting, a storm that seemed determined to strip me bare. But in the early morning hours, my daughter's cry split the air high and fierce. The nurse laid her on my chest, and I wept as her tiny hand curled instinctively against my skin. She was so small, yet so powerful, proof that something pure could grow from the wreckage of betrayal. I whispered her name, Lily, into the crown of her head. It felt like a prayer answered not by Ethan, not by anyone else, but by life itself. For the first week, I lived in a haze of sleepless nights and fragile joy. My mother stayed with me, rocking Lily when my body begged for rest, cooking meals that tasted of home and healing. But even in the cocoon of newborn love, the outside world intruded. Headlines began to circulate, Ethan's name tied to fraud investigations, investors demanding answers, whispers of charges. The evidence Daniel had prepared was now in the hands of people who could not ignore it. One afternoon, as I nursed Lily by the window, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Ethan. His voice was hollow, frayed with panic. "Ava, please, I need your help. They're coming after me. You have to tell them I'm not what they think." I looked down at Lily. Her tiny mouth latched, her eyes closed in perfect peace. "You already made your choices," I said quietly. "And I've made mine. My only loyalty is to her now." He begged, pleaded, his words tumbling into promises of change, of redemption. But the more he spoke, the clearer it became. He wasn't sorry for the lies, only for being caught. I hung up before his desperation could seep into the fragile sanctuary I was building. Days passed and the scandal widened. Savannah disappeared from the public eye, her silence louder than any denial. Ethan's empire crumbled, each new revelation, another stone ripped from its foundation. And while the city gossiped, I focused on the rhythm of motherhood, diaper changes, lullabies, the simple miracle of Lily's heartbeat against my chest. One night, after Lily finally drifted to sleep, I stood at the window watching snow fall under the streetlight. My reflection stared back at me, tired, yes, but alive in a way I hadn't been in years. Betrayal had tried to break me, but it had only cleared space for something greater. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was becoming. The court date loomed, but I no longer feared it. Ethan would face the consequences of his lies, and I would face the future with my daughter in my arms, not as a victim, but as a woman who had walked through fire and emerged holding life itself. I whispered to Lily as she stirred in her crib, "We are enough, and no one can take that from us." Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment if you've ever rebuilt yourself from betrayal. Your voice matters more than you know.